Okay, so I think that we can start because we have already a very interesting group. People are coming. So I will start. Thank you very much, Professor Galston, for being here with us. This is, as I told you, one smart and discussions group that usually we make with some regularity, with people that are from different sectors and activities. And today we have with us Professor Galston, that is from the Brookings Institution, that is well known think tank from Washington, and he will speak with us about the quality of governance in institutions. So the idea is that he can make a keynote of about 20-25 minutes, and then, as usual, we'll have a discussion that I will moderate. I will ask everyone that wants to make some comments or things like that, that puts that. I will ask you to have the micro down, that is usual, and then Professor Gosson, the word is yours, and we wait for your comments, okay? Thank you very much.
Sure. I'm not sure that I'm going to speak for 25 or even 20 minutes. Experience has taught me that it is the dialogue rather than the monologue that really determines the quality of the session. I cannot possibly anticipate all of the questions that you may want to put to me. And so I'd like to get to the question period as quickly as possible. Having said that, I do have a few thoughts to offer about the quality of democratic governance today. And I see the quality of governance as being affected by a number of different factors. First of all is the quality of the institutions themselves. Some institutions are well designed for the purposes that they are intended to carry out, and others are not. Some institutions are outdated in the sense that they were very fit for purpose 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, but they have not been reformed to take changes into account. One obvious example of that is the information explosion that has occurred, that has changed the way business operates. And many people are impatient with government institutions because they don't seem to operate as efficiently as many contemporary businesses do. So that would be one example of institutional quality affected by changes in the environment. Another factor that affects the quality of governance, of course, is the quality of the people within institutions. And what we've discovered, at least in the United States, is that the quality of people in institutions is affected not only by the salaries they get, but also by the respect that they enjoy from the public. It is very unpleasant to work in an institution that is not respected by the public, and where the presumption of people walking into a government office is that they'll be treated rudely and inefficiently and will have to come back and are asked for 29 different kinds of forms which they don't have, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first factor, institutions. The second factor affecting governance is the nature of political relationships, how the political system functions. And as a broad generalization, I will say that when political systems are deeply polarized and when major parties find it impossible to cooperate with each other to do their country's business, that inevitably affects the way institutions that serve the public will function. And that happens in a number of different ways. First of all, some political parties see it as advantageous to attack particular government institutions as being instruments, political instruments of the other side. And it's also the case that deep political polarization tends to create public mistrust. And public mistrust is one of the great enemies of efficient and effective governance. It gets in the way of everything. I speak with some deep knowledge of the level of public trust in my own country, the United States, which is at record lows. And this affects the operation of every institution in our government, and not just at the national level, but also at the state and local level as well. If our tax system is not trusted by citizens, if our judicial system, if our criminal justice system, even our educational system is not trusted by the people, that will make it much more difficult for those institutions to deliver the kind of governance that people expect and deserve. So it's a kind of a vicious cycle where public mistrust, which has a number of different sources, can make it even more difficult for government institutions to meet their expectations. And that in turn feeds into diminished performance and even lower grades from the public. And the United States has been locked into that kind of cycle for a very long time. I guess the final point that I would like to make in this connection is that large changes in the environment can have very important effects on the quality of governance. And not all the institutions in our societies have responded to those large changes very effectively. Let me list four. I could list more, but let me list four. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, is the information revolution, which has made a number of government institutions appear to be outdated. The way these institutions function, but it also affects public attitudes. As we know, businesses have to invest billions and billions of dollars upgrading their information systems. And they can do that either by drawing from their profits or by getting loans to invest in future productivity. Governments don't operate that way. Governments don't make profits that they can draw on. And of course, governments can take out loans, but there's only so much government financing through loans that is bearable and compatible with economic growth. And so it's the taxpayers who are called upon to provide the resources to upgrade governance systems. And there's frequently, at least in the United States and a number of other countries, deep public resistance to the idea of paying large sums to upgrade information systems. A second example of a big change that institutions are struggling to respond to would be changes in the global climate. Because this is, as we can see in the United States, in Europe, everywhere we look, this is challenging institutions and programs that are designed to secure public safety and respond to emergencies. And that has, I could go through many, many different examples of that. But for example, if sea levels are rising, it doesn't make very much sense for governments to assist homeowners in frequently flooded areas to rebuild repeatedly after floods. But many of the programs are designed to do just that. And they need to be redesigned in order to permit people to adjust to these changes without losing control of their lives. If we if we spent some of the money that we're now spending paying people to rebuild frequently flooded houses, if we help them to move to higher ground in their communities, that would be a much more efficient way of proceeding over time. But relatively few government programs are structured to do that. And I could multiply examples of ways in which relatively rapid changes in the climate are making it much more difficult for government institutions to carry out their assigned functions. They need to change. They need to change their outlook quite fundamentally. And as always in governance, rapid change is the exception rather than the rule. The third kind of change that's affecting governance, it seems to me, is the vast change in the global economic environment. It has become a cliche to say that the era of ever increasing globalization is behind us. I think that's true. I think we've entered a new era, but we're still trying to cope as governments and as societies with the consequences of the previous era. In many countries, what used to be the backbone of the economy, namely a robust manufacturing sector, has been destroyed or greatly weakened by competition. Competition from Asia and increasingly from the global South as well. And we have been very, very slow to adjust to that, with the effect that there are substantial portions of society that now believe that they are worse off than they were 30 or 40 years ago. And that sentiment is very, very dangerous for democratic governance. It is one of the fundamental fuels, I believe, that has propelled the upsurge of populism throughout the democratic West. And populism, unfortunately, tends to be anti-institutional. It tends to emphasize direct relationships between leaders and followers that bypass institutions. And so populism itself is a challenge to institutional effectiveness, because populists try, to achieve a kind of governance intermediation, or disintermediation, rather. They try to break through the institutions, establish direct relationships with the people, and in the process, government institutions are frequently targeted as the enemy and not as part of the solution. The fourth and final challenge to effective governance that I'll put on the table is the very rapid cultural changes that have occurred, that I think have disoriented many people. Many of these have to do with gender relations, others with the cultural effects of mass immigration. But these cultural changes, which have divided societies between those who welcome the changes and those who resist them, has been the second major fuel for the populist upsurge. And there are many citizens in our societies who are nostalgic, for reasons I can understand, nostalgic for the way things used to be before all of these changes, both economic and cultural, occurred. They are looking for leaders who promise to turn the clock back to a time when things were better for them. And this has challenged all of our societies to respond with a forward-looking vision that can be as compelling as the politics of nostalgia. And it turns out to be very difficult for democratic politicians in current circumstances to come up with such visions. If countries are on a reasonably even keel right now, they're lucky. But if they're not, then the advantage goes to people who promise to reverse the tide and take us back to times that many people in our societies regard as simpler, better, less conflictual, more harmonious. And all of these are understandable sentiments, but they, I think, have not contributed to improving the business of government, improving the quality of governance, quite the reverse. Well, I could go on, but I've talked for about 20 minutes. I think I've put enough ideas on the table to at least get the conversation started. But let me emphasize, I am willing to take this conversation in any direction you choose, whether it relates to my comments or not. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor William. I think it was a very interesting context and introduction. We have here people that are interested on these topics, and I think, as usual, I will try to mobilize some of them to make questions or comments. We have here Victor Tavares. We are going to change people that are participating. He is a professor in university. He was a colleague of mine in business school. Victor, do you want to make some comments, some questions to Professor Galston, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. Congratulations for your magnificent presentation. I would like to ask you, what do you think that will be the evolution of the democracies regarding the increasing importance of autocracies that we are seeing nowadays?
Okay.
Well,
Professor Williams, usually we try to have 3 questions, okay, so that it can be
fine. Whatever.
Jorge Jordão, you have also a great experience in governance in terms of companies and associations. Do you want to make any comment or question to Professor Gossett, please? We are not listening to you. You must put the sound.
Have a problem here. That's okay? No.
Yes,
Yep.
perfect.
Good.
That's okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I would like to congratulate for your brief and very interesting presentation about the present challenges. Recently, I was told that we are living in a society facing 3 Ps: polarization, populism, and post-truth. I think that this characterization was recently done by a sociologist, an English sociologist. I would like to have your take about this view.
Okay, perfectly. We have here also Carlos Tavares, that is a well-known economist and professor here in Portugal. Carlos, thank you very much for being with us. Do you want to make any comment, any question to Professor Gossett? We are not listening, so.
It's okay now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I have a question. I'm not sure whether or not it's pertinent, but I'll make it anyway. The professor, you spoke about in the beginning about governance and institutions and so on. We live in a world with governance and institutions that were thought and built for a different environment, or a relatively different environment from what we have today, and that you described very, very correctly, the changes that are occurring in our economic and social environment. Do you think that these institutions and this governance system are appropriate or are able to cope with the challenges that you mentioned about the new issues that are coming up in the world today?
Okay, so Professor, we have already 3 questions, 3 comments, so please. Okay.
Yeah. To the first question, on the challenge of autocracy, I have to say that I agree with my President Biden, who frames the central struggle in the world today as the struggle between democracy and autocracy. And this is a struggle that goes well beyond our response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's a struggle that goes on many fronts. And I would say that, well, by way of background, I served for many years on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is the major democracy promoting institution in the United States. And, I observed, as have others, that the third wave of democracy, the famous third wave that, really almost, I think, began with Portugal and lasted for about 30 years, came to an end early in the 21st century. And we have seen more than 15 years of democratic retreat. This is very troubling. And I think the war in the Russian invasion of Ukraine has finally convinced the world's democracies that they need to band together and raise their games, both internally and externally, that is to say, collectively. And I believe that the politics of the next generation will be defined by the success or failure of that struggle. It may very well be, I mean, I publish a weekly column in the Wall Street Journal that some of you may be aware of, and I speculated about a month ago in one of my columns that we may have seen peak China, and that one of the major forces leading the autocratic surge may now be less effectively promoting its interests abroad as it is increasingly consumed with economic and social problems at home. I don't know whether that's true or not, but given what we've seen, the revelations of the past month about the weakness of the Chinese economy, the increasing number of educated young people who can find no jobs, which is social dynamite wherever it occurs and persists, we could be in a situation where democracies around the world can regain the advantage and take the offensive. I certainly hope so. But I absolutely agree with the formulation of your question. It is the central struggle of our times. With regard to the 3 Ps, I don't know who the sociologist was who put that, who advanced that account, but I think it's a pretty good summary of where we are. To be frank, certainly in the United States, I can recognize all 3 of those forces as dramatic. I'm sorry. Are you talking to me, Em?
No, I was trying to quote that sociologist. That's Mr. Alastair Campbell, the former chief of cabinet of Tony Blair.
And and I certainly agree with that. And as I said, in the United States, each of those forces has become increasingly powerful in this millennium. And I say that with no pleasure, right? I mean, because I believe in the reverse of all 3. And so I see forces that I do not like getting stronger in the United States, but not just in the United States. And finally to the question, the question of whether the institutions that we now have are up to date or outdated. I think I made it pretty clear that I think that many changes, starting with information technology, but not ending there, have come together to lead many people to believe, I think correctly, that we stand in need of a new era of institutional reform. What I can tell you from the American perspective is that every era of improved governance in the United States has been preceded by renewed attention to the question of institutional structure and institutional reform. I could give you many, many examples. It's not a sexy topic. You know, it's not an issue that makes the hearts of Democratic voters beat faster. But it is something that goes to the heart of the experience that they have of the relationship between them as individual citizens and their own government. You know, certainly in the United States, we need a new era of institutional reform. But I think it's pretty clear from controversies that are going on throughout Western democracies that the same is probably true almost everywhere. That we have institutions that were designed, created, expanded during the era of the industrial economy, and political parties and labor unions that enjoyed a great deal of power. In many countries, all of those forces have waned, and new challenges have arisen that institutions created in the wake of World War II are not so effective in addressing.
Okay, we have other people that I think want to make comments. Belmiro Toscoto, you are speaking from Aveiro, I think. Do you want to make some comment, please? And then we pass to other people, okay?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. It's a very good topic. I would like to also have your elaboration about whether you see that the governance in the different levels of international, national, and local might be struggling with different ways, meaning at local level, probably it's very easy to organize the participation of the people. It's very easy to organize the referendums. It's very easy to discuss the problems. At national or international level, things are different. And the parliaments, the institutional frame is quite different. Do you think probably is this where the governance might be more closer to people at the local level, first step, force progressing more quickly than in other levels of institutional frameworks?
Okay, thank you very much. Rui Teixeira, do you want to make some comment? You are speaking from Viana do Castelo and the family institution. I don't know if you want to make any comment, any question. Rui Teixeira, I don't know if you listen. Okay, I think he's not listening. Now I think we have other people that can make some comments. Luís Farinha, that is responsible for a very well-known public institution. He was until some months ago in Paris. Do you want to make some comment, Luís, or some question? You know all these questions of governance are very important, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you very much for your presentation, Professor. It was very helpful. At the beginning, you spoke about confidence and trust in institutions. I'm from the public sector. I dealt with a lot of these things. And the question is, how can we improve? Is there a magical solution? I suppose not, but to improve confidence and trust, especially in public institutions, because the survival of this public institution, and I'm speaking of Portugal, of course, depends much on the trust that not only the external public, but also those that serve the institution can found on working on that kind of on this institution. How can the responsibles for the governance of this institution, and even the public power, the government, what can we do? What are there any magical solution to improve this trust and confidence in public institutions? Thank you very much.
Okay, we have here also with us Manuel Agria, that is a well-known specialist in corporate governance and things like that. Manuel, do you want to make some comment in the question to Professor Goldstone, please?
Yes, Jaime, thank you. I would like to congratulate Professor Goldstone for the presentation. And I will put a question. You mentioned 4 points which are linked within your opinion to the quality of governance in institutions. I can choose one, if you permit me, which is people on the institutions, the second one that you nominated. But you put in a way that I agree, but perhaps not exactly what I think about it. You mentioned the respect from the public, but I would put it in another way. The quality of board members and for the executives in terms of the fit and proper requisites. I think that perhaps the quality of the governments is linked with that capacity of people who are members of the boards and executives. They really are acquainted with the responsibilities and what are the capacities that they have to achieve. Because effectively, you can have a wonderful corporate governance code or a corporate governance sheet, but if the people who are in charge of putting them in practice, they don't really are effectively qualified people. Okay.
Okay, Professor, we have already 3 more questions. Comments,
I think that's 3 questions. So I'm now learning the rhythm of this discussion. And, first question dealt with levels of governance and their respective competences. And that is, I believe, a very important question today. Using my own country as an example, we have spent about a century moving power from our regions and localities to the national level. We've done that for all sorts of good reasons, but there are now, in my judgment, reasons to think that that process has gone too far, and that the national government in the United States is now trying to do many things that would be better handled at the state level or even the local level. And I say that for a number of reasons, one of which you've already mentioned, and that is the capacity of local governments to remain closer to the people. It's easier for them, to understand the nature of the problems that specific localities face. It may be easier for them to get people together around a table, literally, to craft solutions, etc. It is also the case, especially in large, diverse democracies like the United States, that that giving more power to states and localities can serve as a kind of pressure valve, because different parts of the country have different views on different issues. And if you try to have one single national solution, you're going to have a great deal of national conflict. Perhaps it's better on some issues to allow states and localities to be diverse in the way they handle problems. So, yes, as a matter of fact, I'm trying in the Brookings Institution now to find funding for a major new project on what we in the United States call federalism, which means the ability of states and localities to assume a greater measure of responsibility for their own affairs. I think this may be one of the great discussions in the United States over the next generation. And obviously, it is easier for countries with federal constitutional structures to go down this road. Compare, for example, Germany to France. Germany is a federal republic. That's part of its official name. And it has states with a great deal of constitutional power. France, by contrast, is much more centralized. And I think that is going to be a problem for governance in France over the next generation. President Macron has tried to deal with that problem by going around the country doing town halls with citizens. That's better than nothing, but even better than a Macron tour, would be some structural changes in France that allowed different regions and localities to respond more flexibly to their own circumstances. Is there a magic bullet for restoring trust and confidence in governing institutions? No, but I can tell you that responding with urgency and effectiveness to crises is one very good way of doing that. Let me give you two examples, one from the United States, one, unfortunately, from a country just across the Mediterranean from you, Morocco. Okay, in the United States, in the state of Pennsylvania, there was a big crash on the highway that led to a fire that destroyed one of the bridges on the main artery linking the northeast of the United States to the south and to Florida. Okay, and the prediction after this fire was that traffic would be interrupted for months. People would have to take side streets. And this would be a big impediment, not only to travel and tourism, but also to the free flow of commerce, because many trucks, thousands every day, travel up and down that highway. The governor of Pennsylvania, newly elected, said, this is intolerable. And so he gathered a crisis team, and in 12 days, he fixed the road. And confidence in his administration surged as a result, because the people saw him as using the powers of his office and the different competences of different institutions over which he had jurisdiction to solve a complex problem, to respond with urgency and effectiveness. Now, contrast that with what's going on in Morocco right now. I find the behavior of the Moroccan government from the king on down almost inexplicable, impossible to understand. Because, as we know from disasters around the world, time is of the essence. And if you leave people without shelter, without food, without medical assistance, not just for days, but day after day after day, then that inflicts a very serious blow on public confidence in institutions. Not just the people who are caught up in a terrible natural disaster like a flood or an earthquake, but also for other people in the society who are observing the performance of the government and cannot approve of it. Turning away international help in a very public way while people are dying in the rubble. This is very, very bad for trust in government, not to mention for the people who are undergoing these hardships. So, obviously, most day-to-day problems with governance are not of this sort, but when there's a very high-profile event, the ability of the responsible institutions to respond with urgency and effectiveness is absolutely fundamental to maintaining and improving public trust. Now, with regard to the third question, I absolutely agree with you on the importance of boards and effective governance, not only in the corporate sector, but in what we call the nonprofit sector in this country as well. And great fiascos occur when boards of directors do not do their work, when they don't take responsibility. An example of that in my country occurred just a few months ago when a major regional bank collapsed. It collapsed because the leadership of the bank, had made a very heavy bet on what interest rates would do, and the reverse happened, leaving them with a huge mismatch between their portfolio of loans on the one hand, and the interest rate they had to pay to obtain funds on the other. They couldn't withstand that, and they collapsed. There had been many warnings in the 18 months prior to the collapse that the bet that they were making was a very risky bet for the bank. Of course, the president of the bank thought he was absolutely right and was determined to proceed down that path. It was the task of the board of directors, to tell him that he was risking the existence of the institution whose interests he was trying to pursue. They did not do so. I've seen examples in the nonprofit sector where the failure of boards, to roll up their sleeves, learn what's going on, take responsibility for it, and undertake corrective measures when necessary. The failure to do that can frequently lead to catastrophic results. So yes, I was talking about support from the bottom. You're talking about support from the top. It's equally important.
Okay, we pass to another, approaching to the end, but okay, we still have some time. And Paulo Reis, you have all such experience in management and entrepreneurship. Do you want to make any comment, any question to Professor, please?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being with us and having this session. There's one question that was always on my thought when you were talking, which has to do with events like the Moroccan one. I would say unlikely when people think of their politics and how they're going to handle. So one of the big questions is, like it was COVID, why should governments, in particularly democracies, meaning elected governments, bet on occurrences that are highly likely not to occur or not expectable to occur, spend a lot of money, because that's what it needs, if nothing is going to happen, whilst there are other areas that can win votes. Now, the Moroccan situation is different because we are talking about dictatorships, but how can we tackle this? Because that's something, COVID for me was a very good example. Everybody knew that it was going to come, right? So it should not be an emergency because we should be prepared. But if governments were betting on and putting together the infrastructures for something that during my legislation was not going to happen, I would be wasting my resources and I would not get any votes. So how do we handle that? Thank you.
Okay. Jorge Ribeiro Machado, you are also dealing with these questions of governance in IS. Do you want to make some comment or question, please? Jorge, I don't know if you are listening now. Okay, maybe you are not listening. Rui Dias Ferreira, you are also a great experience in terms of governance and management. Do you want to make some comment to Professor? Okay, we have to pass to other peoples. I don't know if Carlos Vieira we have here from Católica for the Business School. I think he has also experience with these topics. Carlos, do you want to make some comment or any question? It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hello, it's my first time here, and
yes,
thank you very much. On my side, and probably, I don't know if you mentioned this because I have a slight 5 minutes where I was not listening, but about the social media. So what about the social communication? What we see is that the major newspapers, for example, the American, are supported by big corporations, supported also in the social media sector, and sometimes we see that we always need all this financing to have at least what you mentioned before about the perception from the people for this polarization and the ways that we can analyze it on a true journalistic way. So what's your view on the way that this support should be made? Because historically the newspapers and and comparable items were supported by rich people, sometimes just getting that the newspapers did not say bad things about themselves, but being open to all the analysis and clear thought. What we see, for example, in Portugal is that the newspapers are getting every day more and more opinion and less critical judgment. And so what's your view on this side, and if it's important or not in order to help democracies thrive? So it's an area that I believe it's important in terms of democracy.
Okay. Paulo Coutinho, do you want to make any comment or question? You have also some experience in governance and the law and things like that? No? You don't have time? Okay. And Ana Paula Barros, you are speaking from Macau, so you are a little bit far away from us. But do you want to make some comment, any question? It will be a pleasure to hear from you. Are you listening, Anna? Okay, I think she's not listening. Okay, Professor, you can.
Very much.
Okay. So we are speaking from Macau. You are near China. Okay, please.
Yes, I'm speaking from Macau, and I work for the government, the regional government. So it's a pleasure to be here and profit from your presentation, Professor. I would like to come back to the respect from the pupil. What do you think are the major factors that induce that respect? Even we talked already about the results, but is there any inherent feeling? Is there any inherent factor that can improve or dismiss that respect along with the salary, of course?
Okay, Professor. We have already 3 questions, please, and 3 comments.
Let me deal with the first question, which I think goes to the heart of the difficulty that so many democratic countries, indeed governments, indeed all governments, had coping, let's say, with COVID. In the United States, we had a law creating a stockpile of emergency medical equipment for occurrences such as the pandemic that hit us early in 2020. But year after year, the legislature, the national legislature, the Congress of the United States, refused to make adequate appropriations, to purchase material for that stockpile. There was always something more urgent. There was always something sexier that might attach, get, or attract the attention of the voters, just as as Ana Paula said. And so when the pandemic hit us and we opened up the stockpile, there was almost nothing in it. And this created enormous difficulties in the early months of the pandemic in the United States. I wish I had a magic solution for that. Some individuals, put themselves on what are called automatic savings plans, where a certain amount is deducted from their paychecks every week or 2 weeks or every month and automatically invested, and they never see it, but then decades later, it's there when they need it. Maybe we should think about legislative mechanisms that create automatic long-term appropriations into emergency funds, emergency stockpiles, things of that sort. Because it's one thing to say that an event is rare. It's another thing to say that it will never happen. But a lot of people move very easily from the first to the second, right? They don't think about it for decades. And then when it hits, their government is unprepared. And then the fingers start being pointed and everybody criticizes the government for not being ready to deal with the emergency. Well, I think we should all look in the mirror when that happens, because if we don't support programs that may not pay off for years or decades or even in our lifetime, but which are absolutely necessary to deal with events that are scarce but potentially catastrophic, if we don't support mechanisms that do that, then every decade or two, there's going to be another big fiasco with major consequences for our economies, our societies, and for life itself. So, as I said, if you put me in an office for a week, I could design those mechanisms very easily. Whether I could persuade elected representatives of the people to support those mechanisms, when there's always something more urgent or more appealing, more publicly attractive, that's a different question altogether. The question of providing for the farther future is one of the fundamental questions facing democratic societies. And, like Ulysses tying himself to the mast, we need to find devices that will overcome our natural reluctance to fund and support such programs, or we'll keep on having the same experience decade after decade. With respect to the media, absolutely crucial question. And as Aristotle would say, there is a happy medium for the media. We want the media to be watchdogs. We want them to do investigations that we don't have the time or the resources to do ourselves. On the other hand, we don't want them to be so eager to criticize and undermine institutions that they fail to give credit to institutions when credit is due. And unfortunately, in much of journalism, uncovering a scandal is much sexier, will attract, much more attention than finding the many examples of institutions that are behaving in a praiseworthy manner. And that's not always the case, but it is the case all too often. And if you see nothing but bad news about government day after day, week after week, that is not likely to enhance trust in government. And so it's easy for me to sit here and call for balanced coverage, where good institutional performance receives the same visibility as the failure of institutions to do what they're expected to do. But of course, the editors who are responsible for the news flow come under great pressure, frequently from the rich people who have purchased the institutions, to maximize the number of people who are paying attention to their publication, whatever it may be. And and so is there a good relationship between the profit motive on the one hand and the ability of major media outlets to do their duty? No, there is not. That's a permanent tension. I was asked for a silver bullet, magic wand before to deal with the issue of trust in government. I have no magic wand whatsoever to deal with the bad incentives that many privately owned media corporations have. And finally, on the issue of respect, it's been my experience that when government workers treat citizens with respect, they tend to be respected more. And so suppose I walk into a post office and I'm waiting while some clerk is talking on the phone, to a friend or a family member or what have you. And that clerk doesn't pay any attention to me for 2 or 3 or even 5 minutes while this conversation is going on. I will remember that. I will remember that, and I will not think well, not only of that person, but of the manager who permits that person to behave in that fashion. And once again, this is an area where many people in the private sector tend to be better trained than people in the public sector. And I don't know, one speculation is that if you're protected by a powerful organization that will prevent you from being fired, even if you don't perform your duties well, that may create bad incentives. But respect is contagious. If you respect other people, they will tend to respect you, and that goes for clerks, just as much as anybody else.
Professor, we are almost approaching the end. Could you make a final statement, 2 or 3 minutes to conclude?
Well, certainly, and that is, first of all, I am absolutely delighted, by the diversity and the penetrating quality of the questions that I've received, and I think they speak to the multifaceted interest in the problem of effective, respected, and trusted governance. We've explored issues of institutional reform and many others. I think this conversation has uncovered a number of difficulties that impede the necessary changes in the institutions in which many of us have spent our lives in one way or another. In my experience, we spend so much time in government thinking about policies that we don't spend enough time thinking about the instruments through which these policies are supposed to be delivered to the people and make their lives better. And so it's like, if you think of effective governance as a process that begins with leadership, flows through policy changes to institutions, to the people, this is a sequence where everything needs to work well in order for governance to be effective. And if there is good leadership, sound policies, but the institutions to turn those policies into effective governance are outdated, then you're not going to get the results that you want. So I guess my one piece of advice in conclusion would be for all of us to renew the attention that we pay and the attention that those who listen to us pay with issues of institutional design and institutional performance, because they can be absolutely critical and they can thwart good intentions. So that is my closing statement. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to Jaime Quesado for making this happen. And I wish all of you well.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and thank you for being here. Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you. Have a nice week. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.